My name is Claire Rowan Mercer. I am 42 years old. And the morning my husband handed me divorce papers, every joint account we owned showed a balance of 0. The night before had been our 15th wedding anniversary. Evan had ordered white roses for the dining room, reserved a private table at the most expensive restaurant in Charlotte, and spent the entire evening checking the time on his phone as though romance were an appointment he planned to leave early. At 11:47, while I was upstairs removing the diamond earrings he had once given me, he transferred every dollar from our checking, savings, brokerage, and emergency accounts into a company I had never heard of. By sunrise, $786,412 had disappeared. At 8 the next morning, I walked into our breakfast room and found Evan seated at the long walnut table with his attorney. The attorney's name was Martin Pike. I knew him from company dinners, where he laughed too loudly at Evan's jokes and never once asked me a question he waited to hear answered. A leather folder rested in front of him. Evan wore the navy suit he reserved for lender meetings and funerals. He looked rested, prepared, almost relieved. "Sit down, Claire," he said. I did not sit. I looked at the coffee he had poured for himself, at the untouched cup placed across from him, and at the silver anniversary card still leaning beside the flowers from the night before. Then Martin slid the folder toward me. "You have been served with a petition for dissolution of marriage," he said. "There is also a proposed temporary financial agreement. Mr. Mercer hopes to resolve this privately and efficiently." I opened the folder. Evan wanted the house, his company shares, both vehicles, the vacation property at Lake Norman, and all intellectual property connected to Mercer Fleet Technologies. He offered me 6 months of health insurance and a one-time payment of $20,000, contingent upon my signing a permanent confidentiality agreement. I read the number twice, not because I was confused, but because I wanted to remember exactly how cheaply he had priced 15 years of my life. Evan leaned back in his chair. "You will leave with nothing if you fight me. I moved the liquid assets last night. The business is mine. The house is leveraged. Your cards will stop working by noon. Martin has already prepared the emergency motions." Martin smiled as if he had just watched a chess piece fall exactly where he expected. I took out my phone and opened our banking app. Checking 0. Savings 0. Investment account 0. The household reserve account, where I had insisted we keep 1 year of expenses, was also empty. Evan watched my face, waiting for panic. He wanted the moment when my breathing changed. He wanted tears. Accusation. Perhaps a desperate promise that I would sign anything if he restored enough money for groceries. I looked at him and said nothing. That silence unsettled him, more than anger would have. "Did you hear me?" he asked. "You have no access to money." "I heard you." "Then perhaps you should start being realistic." The doorbell rang. Evan frowned. Martin checked his watch. I walked to the front hall and opened the door for Daniel Cho, the accountant who had handled my personal tax filings for 12 years. He carried a slim black briefcase and wore the calm expression of a man arriving for a scheduled meeting rather than a marital execution. "Good morning, Claire," he said. "I brought the statement you requested." When we returned to the breakfast room, Evan's confidence sharpened into irritation. "Why is your accountant here?" Daniel sat beside me, opened his briefcase, and placed a second statement on the table directly over the divorce papers. The first page carried no dramatic photograph, no legal threat, and no emotional language. It contained a name, an account number, and a balance. Rowan Vector Trust. Beneficial owner Claire Rowan Mercer. Current value $28. 471. 906. 是吧? Evan read the first line. The color left his face so quickly, it looked as though someone had switched off the blood beneath his skin. "What is that?" he whispered. Daniel folded his hands. "The account, Mr. Mercer missed." Evan stared at me. "You hid $28 million from me." "No." I said. "You never asked the right question." He reached for the statement. But Daniel placed 2 fingers on the page and held it in place. "Before you touch anything," Daniel said, "you should understand that the balance is not the most important part." Martin's smile had disappeared. "Then, what is?" Daniel turned to the next page. It showed a licensing schedule, a list of quarterly royalty payments, and a red notice issued at 6:12 that morning. Temporary suspension of Atlas Route Platform license. Trigger: unauthorized transfer of restricted distributions and material breach of fiduciary covenants. Evan's hand stopped above the paper. Mercer Fleet Technologies had built its billion-dollar valuation around Atlas Route, the logistics optimization engine that scheduled trucks, warehouses, drivers, fuel loads, and delivery windows for some of the largest retailers in the country. Evan had spent 10 years telling investors that his instincts had transformed a struggling regional fleet company into a technology leader. What he never said was that Atlas Route began as a mathematical model I developed before we were married. He also never said that his company did not own it. It licensed it from me. For years, I had allowed Evan to stand at conference podiums and call himself a visionary because I believed marriage was not a competition for applause. I had stepped away from public work after my mother's illness and then remained behind the scenes while we raised our daughter, repaired the company, and survived the years when payroll depended on which invoice cleared first. I wrote code at our kitchen table. I redesigned dispatch logic while Evan slept. I met with drivers at 4 a.m. and listened to the problems no executive presentation ever captured. When the first version of Atlas Route reduced empty miles by 31%, Evan called it our breakthrough. When the company attracted investors, he began calling it his breakthrough. By the time business magazines placed his photograph on their covers, my name had disappeared from every origin story. But it had never disappeared from the contracts. Daniel tapped the suspension notice. "Mr. Mercer. Last night's transfer swept restricted royalty distributions from the joint investment account into Halcyon Strategic Partners. That account was funded partly with trust distributions designated for tax reserves and platform maintenance. Your transfer violated the license agreement and activated an automatic operational review." "That's absurd," Evan snapped. "The money was in a joint account. I had every right to move it. You had the ability." Daniel replied, "That is not the same as the right." Martin pulled the documents toward himself and began reading. His expression changed line by line. I watched Evan realize that the zero balances he had expected to terrify me had become evidence against him. He had not merely emptied our accounts before filing for divorce. He had transferred money he did not legally own into a company connected to the woman he planned to replace me with, and the account he missed did not just contain money. It contained the legal switch capable of stopping his entire company. Evan pushed away from the table so hard his chair struck the wall. "Who is Halcyon connected to?" Daniel looked at him. "You tell us. You authorized the transfer." I already knew the answer. Halcyon Strategic Partners had been incorporated 6 months earlier by Sloan Avery, Mercer Fleet's chief financial officer. She was 36. Polished, strategic, and always close enough to Evan that their private conversations stopped when I entered a room. For almost a year, I had suspected they were having an affair. 6 weeks earlier, I had learned that the affair was only the visible part of a much larger plan. Evan had not decided to leave me the night before our anniversary. He had been preparing to erase me for months. The first sign had been a tax document that did not belong in our home printer. I found it beneath a stack of school forms. One page from a draft transaction schedule, marked confidential. It listed a proposed management buyout of Mercer Fleet Technologies. Evan and Sloan would lead the acquiring group. My name appeared only once, beside a line describing legacy spousal claims that would be extinguished before closing. I did not confront him. I photographed the page, returned it exactly where I found it, and called Daniel. The second sign came when Evan asked me to sign a routine update to our estate plan. Buried on page 43 was a power granting him authority over intellectual property held in any entity in which I was a beneficiary. I told him I needed time to review it. He laughed and said I was becoming suspicious in middle age. The third sign was Sloane's sudden interest in Atlas Root's source code archives. She claimed the auditors wanted a full inventory. Our information security director later told me she had requested deletion logs and authorship histories, not financial summaries. That was when I stopped wondering whether Evan planned to divorce me. I began documenting how he intended to do it. For 6 weeks, I said nothing while Daniel traced transfers. A patent attorney reviewed the licensing structure, and an independent cybersecurity firm preserved every version of Atlas Root's development history. I continued cooking dinner. I attended our daughter's college planning meeting. I sat beside Evan at a charity luncheon while Sloan touched his wrist beneath the table and assumed I did not notice. Silence was not surrender. It was evidence gathering. Evan stared at the statement and then at me. You knew. I knew enough to wait. You set me up. You emptied our accounts, filed for divorce, and attempted to transfer protected money to your mistress's company. You did not need my help setting yourself up. Martin raised a hand. We should all stop speaking until counsel can review the relevant agreements. You are counsel, I said. He did not answer. Daniel removed a third document from his briefcase. There is one more issue. At 9 this morning, Mercer Fleet's principal lender received notice of the license suspension. Under the credit agreement, loss or interruption of Atlas Root constitutes a material adverse event. The bank has requested an emergency call with the board at 11. Evan looked at the clock. It was 8:23. In less than 3 hours, the board he controlled would learn that his company no longer had the unquestioned right to use the technology supporting 72% of its revenue. And they would learn why. He reached for his phone. I saw Sloane's name already glowing on the screen. Go ahead, I said. Tell her the transfer worked. He walked out of the room without replying. Martin gathered the divorce documents with less confidence than he had displayed when he arrived. Mrs. Mercer. I was not informed of any trust restrictions or licensing triggers. You were informed that my husband wanted to remove all liquid assets from my reach before serving me. That should have been enough to make you careful. My client represented that the transfer was lawful. Your client also represented himself as the sole creator of Atlas Root for a decade. You may want to start distinguishing his representations from facts. Martin closed his folder. This process has become more complicated than anticipated. Daniel looked at him. Only because you anticipated she had nothing. After the men left the breakfast room, I stood alone beside the white roses. 15 years earlier, Evan and I had cut a small chocolate cake in the back room of a restaurant we could barely afford. We had no savings, no company valuation, and no reason to imagine lawyers would one day calculate our marriage in exhibits and emergency motions. He had held my hands and promised that if success ever came, we would remember who we had been before it. Success had not changed him into a stranger. It had given the stranger enough power to stop pretending. My phone vibrated. A message from Evan appeared. Do not contact the board. Do not speak to the bank. I can still make this easy for you. I read it once and took a screenshot. Then I replied with 4 words. You already made it easy. At 10:45, Daniel and I entered Mercer Fleet's headquarters through the employee entrance rather than the marble lobby Evan used for investors. I had spent years walking those corridors before the company moved into its glass tower. Some of the older dispatchers recognized me immediately. They stood from their desks, Surprised to see the wife who had gradually disappeared from company photographs, but never from their memories, Claire called Rosa Delgado, who had supervised overnight routes since the company owned only 23 trucks. "I heard the system access changed this morning. Is something wrong? The platform is operating under a temporary continuity window." I told her, "No drivers will be stranded. And no deliveries will be interrupted today." Her shoulders loosened. "Thank God. People upstairs are saying the software could shut down at noon." That rumor had come from Evan. He understood that frightened employees could be turned against the person who held the license if he convinced them I was an angry wife, threatening their livelihoods. The board might pressure me to restore full access before examining what he had done. I had anticipated that move. Atlas Route was not a button I could press to stop thousands of trucks in the middle of highways. The license agreement required a safe continuity period. The temporary suspension blocked new deployments, major client onboarding, access to development repositories, and certain automated optimization features. Existing operations could continue for 30 days while the breach was reviewed. I had designed that safeguard years earlier because no marital dispute, corporate fight, or legal emergency should ever endanger drivers or customers. Evan knew that. He simply hoped no one else did. The boardroom occupied the 32nd floor. 11 directors sat around a polished table beneath a screen displaying the Mercer Fleet logo. The principal lender had joined by video. 2 representatives from the private equity fund that owned 28% of the company sat together, whispering over printed documents. Sloane stood beside Evan at the head of the room. She wore a cream suit and the expression of someone who believed the day required performance rather than truth. When she saw me, her gaze flickered toward Daniel's briefcase. Evan began before I reached my chair. "This is a personal marital dispute that Claire has chosen to weaponize against the company," he announced. "She has initiated an improper suspension of mission-critical technology in retaliation for divorce proceedings. I am asking the board to authorize immediate litigation and emergency injunctive relief." One of the independent directors, Judith Kane, turned toward me. Judith had spent 30 years in supply chain technology and had never been impressed by Evan's speeches. "Mrs. Mercer, is the suspension retaliatory?" "No. It was triggered automatically when restricted trust distributions were transferred into an undisclosed entity connected to the chief financial officer." Every head turned toward Sloane. She did not move. "Halcyon is a legitimate advisory vehicle," she said. "The transfer was part of a temporary liquidity restructuring approved by the chief executive." "Was it approved by the audit committee?" Judith asked. Sloane paused. "It did not require audit committee approval." Daniel placed copies of the transfer documents before the directors. The money originated in 4 joint accounts. 2 contained ordinary marital funds. 1 contained designated tax reserves associated with the Rowan Vector Trust. The 4th received quarterly platform royalties that remained subject to maintenance covenants until reconciliation. All 4 balances were swept at 11:47 last night into Halcyon Strategic Partners. The lender's representative leaned toward his camera. "Who owns Halcyon?" Sloane answered carefully. "It is held through a private management entity." "Who owns the private management entity?" Silence stretched across the room. I opened a folder and removed the state registration records Daniel had obtained. "Sloane Avery owns 80%. Evan Mercer owns the remaining 20 through a nominee trust created 3 months ago." Evan struck the table with his palm. "That trust was created for a future acquisition opportunity. Claire has no right to disclose private investment plans. You used marital money and restricted distributions to fund it hours before filing for divorce." Judith said, "Your privacy is not the board's first concern." The private equity representative stopped whispering. Evan shifted tactics. "Even if the transfer requires correction, the license cannot be suspended without causing catastrophic harm. Claire has not worked in the business for years. She does not understand how much is at stake." I looked at the operations dashboard on the screen. This morning's continuity window is active. Existing routes remain supported. No driver has lost access. No client data has been compromised. New code deployment and executive-level repository access are suspended. The company has 30 days to cure the breach. Judith's eyes narrowed. Executive-level repository access, yes. 2 weeks ago. The credentials tied to Sloane's office attempted to export the authorship archive and model training history. The request was denied. Last night. Minutes after the account transfer. The same credentials attempted to delete 3 provenance tables. The automatic license review locked them out. The screen changed. Our cybersecurity consultant appeared by video and confirmed the access logs. Each attempt had originated from a laptop assigned to Sloane. The first export request occurred at 2:13 in the morning. The deletion attempt came at 11:52 the previous night. 5 minutes after Evan drained the accounts, Sloane finally lost her composure. I did not personally make those attempts. My credentials may have been used by someone else. Then you should welcome an independent investigation, I said. She looked at Evan. He did not look back. That small avoidance told me more than an argument would have. They had planned the transfer together, but they had not agreed on who would absorb the blame if it failed. The lender's representative asked the question Evan had been trying to avoid. Mrs. Mercer, what is required to restore the license fully? First, the transferred funds must be returned to their original accounts and preserved under joint control pending the divorce. Second, Halcyon's ownership and transactions must be disclosed. Third, the board must authorize an independent forensic audit. Fourth, Evan and Sloane must be suspended from access to platform repositories while that audit is conducted. Evan laughed once. Without humor. You are asking the board to remove the chief executive and chief financial officer because your feelings were hurt. I am asking the board to respond to unauthorized transfers, attempted destruction of authorship records, and a material license breach. My feelings are not an accounting category. Judith asked for a recess. Evan followed me into the hallway before the doors had fully closed. Sloane remained inside with Martin Pike, who had arrived halfway through the meeting and now looked as though he regretted every hour billed to Evan. You need to stop, Evan said quietly. You are humiliating me in front of people who depend on my leadership. Yesterday you believed emptying every account would make me obedient. Today you are worried about humiliation. This company employs 1,800 people, which is why I built a continuity period into the license. You were willing to gamble those jobs on a secret transfer and a fraudulent buyout. He stepped closer. What do you want? More money, the house, a board seat. Name the number and end this. For 15 years, Evan had treated every conflict as a transaction. If someone resisted, he increased the offer or increased the threat. He had never understood that some things cannot be priced without revealing the person attempting to buy them. I want the money returned, I said. I want the audit. I want the authorship record corrected. And I want you to stop telling our daughter that I am trying to destroy her future. His face hardened. Lily is old enough to understand what you are doing. Our daughter was 17. At 7 that morning. Before Evan served me. He had sent her a message saying I was freezing the company out of spite and that college might become impossible because of me. She had read it while getting ready for school. She called me crying from the parking lot, asking whether we were going to lose our home. I told her the truth in the simplest terms I could. Her father and I were divorcing. He had moved money without agreement. The company would continue operating. None of this was her fault. Evan preferred a different truth. In his version, he was always the person protecting everyone from consequences created by someone else. Leave Lily out of your defense strategy, I said. She is my daughter too. Then act like her father instead of using her as a witness. You can frighten. The boardroom doors opened. Judith called us back inside. The vote was 8-3. The board authorized an independent forensic audit, required immediate return of the transferred funds, and temporarily suspended Evan and Sloan from financial transactions, data repositories, and acquisition negotiations. Evan would remain chief executive in title for 48 hours, while the audit committee evaluated whether a longer suspension was necessary. Operational leadership shifted to Rosa Delgado and the chief technology officer. The license remained in the continuity window. The lender agreed not to accelerate the debt as long as the company complied. Evan sat completely still while the resolutions were read. He had entered the room expecting the board to force me into submission. He left under escort from corporate security because his building access had been limited to the executive lobby and scheduled legal meetings. Sloan followed 3 steps behind him. Her cream suit no longer looked like armor. It looked like evidence. As the elevator doors closed, she turned toward me. "You think this makes you powerful?" she asked. "No," I said. "The documents do." That afternoon, a public relations crisis began exactly as Sloan had planned. Anonymous accounts posted that a bitter founder's wife had disabled critical logistics software during a divorce. A business blogger received excerpts from the divorce petition, along with photographs of me leaving headquarters. Someone leaked the value of the Rowan Vector Trust, but omitted the fact that it predated the marriage and held licensed intellectual property. By 5, the headline was "Everywhere Secret Millionaire Wife Holds Husband's Company Hostage." By 6, television producers were calling. Daniel advised silence. My patent attorney agreed. Martin sent a letter warning me not to make defamatory statements about Evan or Sloan. Evan texted Lily a link to the story and wrote, "I am trying to protect the company your mother is attacking." I sat in my home office, staring at the message. The room had once been our nursery. Years later, I converted it into the place where I reviewed license reports and quietly maintained the system that made Evan famous. On one wall hung the first hand-drawn routing map I created at 26 colored lines connecting depots, fuel stops, weather zones, and delivery windows. It was imperfect, crowded, and mine. I could have answered the smear campaign with bank records and access logs. I could have sent every document to every reporter. Instead, I called the company employees together for a private live stream. Rosa stood beside me at headquarters. The chief technology officer joined from the operations floor. No executives, reporters, or investors were invited. "You have heard that I suspended Atlas Route to punish my husband." I began. "That is false. Existing operations remain active, and the continuity protections were designed years ago to prevent personal or corporate disputes from endangering your work. I will not discuss private divorce allegations. I will discuss facts that affect your jobs. The board has ordered an independent audit after unauthorized transfers and attempts to alter platform records. No employee wages or benefits are being withheld. No driver access is being removed. If the audit identifies misconduct, the people responsible will answer for it. You will not." A mechanic from the Greenville depot submitted the first question. "Did you really invent Atlas Route?" I looked at the old map behind me. I created the first models. Hundreds of engineers, dispatchers, drivers, analysts, and warehouse teams improved them. No billion-dollar product is built by one person. That is exactly why authorship records matter. The response spread through the company faster than Sloan's headline. Employees began posting photographs of old development notebooks, training sessions, and route tests. People who had watched me work before Evan erased me started telling their own stories. Rosa shared a photograph from 15 years earlier of me asleep across 2 chairs at a depot while a system update ran overnight. The public story changed. Not completely. Some people still preferred the simpler image of a wealthy wife using secret money to punish a husband. But enough journalists began asking why Mercer Fleet had never credited the woman whose trust owned the core license. At 9 that night, Evan returned to the house. The temporary board order had not changed his right to enter our marital home. He walked into the kitchen carrying a garment bag and a bottle of bourbon. He looked exhausted but not defeated. "You enjoyed today," he said. "No. You always wanted to be the person everyone thanked." I almost laughed. "For 10 years, I allowed you to accept. Thanks for work you knew began with me. Allowed me. You left. You chose motherhood and private life. I built the company while you hid behind contracts. I left the laboratory when my mother was dying. I continued designing from home. You know that." He poured bourbon without offering me any. "Investors needed one founder, one voice, one story. You were never comfortable in that role. So you decided comfort determined ownership." He turned. "I made Atlas Root valuable. A design in a notebook is not a company." "That is true. You built sales, raised capital, and created an organization. None of that gives you permission to delete the person who created the foundation or to steal restricted money before a divorce." For the first time that day, his anger broke through the careful executive tone. "You were going to leave me eventually. You kept the trust. You kept the license. You kept an exit door open for 15 years while I risked everything." That accusation contained a truth he did not understand. The trust had been created before our wedding on my mother's advice. She had watched her own sister lose a business in a divorce because every patent and contract had been transferred into her husband's company. My mother did not distrust Evan personally. She distrusted structures that required permanent goodness from human beings. The license protected both of us. I said, it allowed the company to use the technology without giving one spouse unilateral control. You benefited from it every day. Until you used it against me. Until you triggered it against yourself. He drank and looked toward the dark windows. "Return full access tomorrow. Withdraw the audit demand. I will restore half the money and increase the settlement to $2 million. All the money returns. The audit continues. Then Lily will watch both of us lose everything. Stop using her. You think $28 million makes you untouchable? It does not. Marriage law has discovery. Judges dislike hidden assets. I will claim the trust appreciated because of my company and seek half of it. Then the court will review every royalty statement, every license report, every transfer, and every email. I am comfortable with discovery." Are you? His eyes shifted for less than a second. That was when I knew the missing money was not the largest secret in our marriage. Evan was afraid of the audit for a reason he had not yet revealed. The audit team arrived the next morning before sunrise. They occupied a secured conference floor, copied the finance servers, preserved email archives, and issued hold notices prohibiting deletion of any record. Evan's company had undergone audits before, but those were orderly examinations built around schedules. Sloan prepared. This one began with the assumption that the schedules themselves might be false. Daniel and I were not permitted to direct the investigation. That distance mattered. I had demanded an independent process, and I could not become the person deciding which evidence deserved attention. I provided the licensing documents, the transfer records, and the suspicious management buyout page. Then I stepped back. At 9, Daniel called me from the parking garage. They found a second ledger. He said, "How quickly?" "Because somebody wanted it found. An encrypted folder was copied to the audit share at 6:14 this morning. No sender name. The access token belongs to Sloan's executive assistant. The folder contained monthly revenue adjustments labeled strategic client incentives. On the official books, they appeared as discounts given to major customers. In the hidden ledger, those same amounts were routed through consulting firms. then into Halcyon, and 3 other entities controlled by Sloan and Evan. The total was not $786,000. It was $9.4 million over 4 years. Some of the money came from inflated software maintenance charges. Some came from rebates that should have been returned to clients. The most disturbing entries involved a driver safety fund created after a fatal highway accident 3 years earlier. Mercer Fleet had announced that 2% of certain contract revenues would support fatigue monitoring, emergency lodging, and family assistance. The hidden ledger showed that more than $1 million assigned to that program had been diverted into executive travel, a private apartment in New York, and payments to Halcyon. I remembered Evan standing beside the widow of the driver who died, promising that the company would honor her husband's name by protecting others. Cameras captured his solemn expression. Employees donated vacation days. Drivers agreed to temporary payroll deductions to expand the fund. Evan and Sloan had treated that grief as a pool of cash. The anonymous upload changed the audit from a marital finance dispute into a potential criminal investigation. The board notified outside counsel. The lender contacted federal regulators. By noon, Evan was placed on full administrative leave. He responded by filing an emergency motion, accusing me of concealing marital assets and intentionally damaging the company. His court papers described the Rowan Vector Trust as a secret fortune built through his labor. He demanded immediate access to half the account and an order compelling restoration of the license. The hearing was scheduled for Monday. That gave us 4 days. On Thursday afternoon, Lily came home from school and found me at the kitchen table reviewing old royalty statements. She set down her backpack but did not remove her coat. "Dad says you had $28 million and never told us." I closed the folder. "I told your father before we married that my technology was held in a trust in a tune. He signed the license agreement with me. The current value grew over many years. Did you tell me no?" Her eyes filled. Not with greed, but confusion. Why not? I could have answered that 17-year-olds do not need detailed knowledge of their parents' financial structures. That would have been reasonable and incomplete, because I wanted you to understand money as safety and responsibility, not identity. I said, and because your father and I had agreed not to discuss the trust until you were older. I see now that secrecy created space for him to tell you whatever version helped him. I am sorry. She sat across from me. Are we rich? We have resources. That does not mean we can ignore consequences. Is Dad going to jail? The question struck me harder than the divorce papers. I do not know. An audit is examining what happened. I will not lie to protect him. And I will not exaggerate to punish him. He says Sloan is just his business partner. I waited. Is she? I have evidence that their relationship is personal. I have not shown it to you because you are his daughter. Not our judge. Lily looked down at her hands. Everyone at school knows. Someone posted pictures of them from New York. The images appeared online an hour later. Evan and Sloan entering the same apartment building on 6 different nights. Sloan wearing the watch I had given Evan for his 40th birthday. Evan carrying flowers on a date when he told me he was meeting lenders in Chicago. The photographs were not uploaded by me. They came from Sloan's former assistant. Her name was Maya Trent. 29. Efficient. Observant. And ignored by executives who mistook quiet competence for invisibility. She requested a meeting with the audit committee and arrived with copies of travel schedules, expense reports, and voice messages. For 2 years. Sloan had ordered Maya to classify private trips as client development. When Maya questioned a payment from the driver safety fund, Sloan threatened to destroy her career. Maya had preserved everything. She also knew why Evan feared discovery. According to a recording made 3 weeks before the divorce, Evan planned to complete the management buyout by using Mercer Fleet shares as collateral. The deal required him to prove that Atlas Route would remain licensed for at least 10 years after the transaction. He could not make that promise without my consent. So he created a plan to manufacture consent. In the recording, Evan and Martin discussed presenting me with estate documents containing a hidden assignment clause. If I signed, the trust's licensing authority would transfer to a marital holding company controlled by Evan. If I refused, they would proceed with the divorce, claim I had abandoned the technology, and seek an emergency court order giving the company continued access. Sloane's voice entered halfway through the recording. Once the deal closes, Claire becomes irrelevant. She said, move the cash before service, freeze her cards, and offer enough that she cannot afford to litigate. She has no idea what the trust is worth without our company. Evan laughed. She will sign before lunch. Claire cannot tolerate conflict. I listened to that sentence 3 times. For years, I had believed my calm protected our marriage from unnecessary damage. Evan had interpreted restraint as incapacity. Every compromise became proof that pressure worked. Every time I chose peace, he learned to make the next demand larger. Daniel stopped the recording. There is more. Near the end, Martin asked what would happen if I challenged the transfer. Evan replied, then we show the court she has been hiding money and destabilizing the company. Publicly, she becomes the greedy wife. Privately, Lily becomes leverage. Claire will not risk her daughter hating her. I felt something inside me become very still. Not numb, but easy. Provide this to the audit committee and my divorce attorney. I said, do not release it publicly. Daniel looked surprised. It would destroy his media narrative. It would also make Lily hear her father describe her as leverage on television. She will know, eventually. But she should hear it from me with support. Not from strangers competing for clicks. That decision cost me in the short term. Evan continued appearing through carefully worded statements that described me as vindictive and secretive. His supporters said the trust proved I had never been committed to the marriage. Some commentators argued that any intellectual property developed near a kitchen table during marriage morally belonged to the husband who commercialized it. I did not answer them. Instead, I prepared for court. My divorce attorney, Simone Beck. It was a former commercial litigator who approached family law as if every emotion needed a document and every document needed context. She placed the trust instrument, prenuptial agreement, licensing contracts, tax returns, and account statements into chronological binders. Your strongest fact is not the 28 million. She told me. It is his signature. Evan had signed the prenuptial agreement 11 days before our wedding. The agreement identified Rowan Vector Trust as my separate property, including all future appreciation, royalties, and derivative intellectual property. He signed again 2 years later when Mercer Fleet entered the original Atlas route license. He signed amendments after each funding round. He certified the arrangement to lenders. He disclosed it to tax authorities. He had not forgotten the trust. He had assumed I would never enforce it. On Friday evening, Sloane called me from an unknown number. I need to speak with you without attorneys. She said, no. Evan is blaming me for the transfers. That sounds like a matter for your attorney. You do not understand. Halcyon was his idea. The ledger was his structure. Martin designed the nominee trust. Evan told me the money was company money, temporarily parked in household accounts for tax reasons. And the affair was that also a misunderstanding in account classification. She exhaled. I am not asking you to forgive me. I am telling you that he planned to make both of us disposable. I already know how he viewed me. You do not know what he said about you after the buyout. I ended the call and forwarded the number to Simone. 10 minutes later, Sloane sent a photograph. It showed a draft press release dated 2 days after the planned divorce filing. The headline read, Mercer Fleet announces leadership transition following founder family health crisis. The body claimed I had experienced an acute psychological episode, attempted to interrupt company systems, and voluntarily entered private treatment. Evan would request long-term judicial authority over the platform to protect employees and clients. Attached to the draft was a list of talking points. Claire has become paranoid about authorship. Claire is confused about finances. Claire's daughter supports her father. Sloan Avery will provide stability. The plan was not simply to divorce me. It was to rewrite me as mentally unstable before I could explain what he had taken. Simone filed an emergency motion that night, seeking preservation of assets, restrictions on public misrepresentation, and temporary exclusive control of the license, pending the audit. We included the draft press release but withheld the affair photographs and the recording until the judge could review them under seal. At 3 a.m, someone attempted to enter the Rowan Vector Trust portal using credentials associated with Martin's law firm. The login failed. At 3:12, Evan called me 19 times. I did not answer. At 6, a courier delivered a settlement offer to the house. Evan would return $300,000, allow me to remain in the house for 1 year, and pay $5 million over 10 years. In exchange, I would restore the license permanently, transfer all future Atlas route improvements to Mercer Fleet, waive claims to company shares, and agree that neither party had committed wrongdoing. The offer expired at noon. Simone read it and laughed. He is offering you a fraction of your own money in exchange for the asset his company cannot survive without. He still thinks the account balance is what matters. Isn't it? No. The account is proof that I can survive the divorce. The license is proof that the company cannot survive dishonesty. At 11:59, I wrote rejected across the first page and returned it by courier. At noon, the audit committee announced that preliminary findings indicated material financial misconduct by senior executives. Mercer Fleet's board removed Evan as chief executive pending final review. The company's shares, privately traded through institutional markets, fell 32% in 2 hours. Evan blamed me, but the drivers, engineers, lenders, clients, and employees began asking a different question. What else had he hidden while everyone was watching his success? The answer began with a warehouse in Tennessee. 3 years earlier, Mercer Fleet acquired a small routing company called Blue Lantern Systems, publicly. The acquisition cost $21 million. The audit found that Blue Lantern's actual owners received $14 million. The remaining $7 million went to advisory entities linked to Halcyon, Martin Pike, and a shell company registered in the name of Evan's college roommate. Blue Lantern's founder had died 6 months after the sale. His widow believed the full purchase price had been paid according to the contract. She had no idea $7 million had been diverted before closing. The same pattern appeared in 2 other acquisitions. Evan had inflated prices, routed excess funds through advisors, and used part of the money to purchase company shares through nominee accounts. He was not only preparing a future buyout, he had been quietly buying the company with money extracted from the company. The audit committee referred the transactions to federal authorities. That weekend, Evan moved out of the house. He did not tell me where he was going. He packed 3 suits, 2 computers, a watch case, and a box of files from the locked cabinet in his study. The security system recorded him leaving at 1:20 in the morning. He carried no family photographs. Lily watched from the top of the stairs. Is he coming back? She asked. I do not know. Do you want him to? I thought about the man I married and the man who had sat across from me beside divorce papers. Waiting to watch fear make me obedient. I want him to become honest. I said, whether he comes back is a different question. Lily sat beside me on the stairs. He told me you were just good at math and he built everything else. I was good at math. He was good at selling a vision. Both mattered. The problem began when he decided only one of us deserved to exist in the story. She leaned against my shoulder. For the first time since the divorce papers arrived, I let myself cry. Not for the money. Not for the company. For the years when Lily had watched a marriage and learned that love meant one person's work could disappear if the other person's voice was louder. I promised myself that whatever happened next, she would see a different lesson. Monday's hearing took place in a courtroom, too small for the number of reporters waiting outside. The judge, Helena Ward, had spent 20 years handling complex commercial disputes before moving to family court. She read the emergency filings in silence while lawyers arranged binders across 3 tables. Evan sat beside Martin. His navy suit had been replaced by charcoal, perhaps because someone advised him that darker colors suggested seriousness. Sloane was not present. Her attorney had notified the court that she might invoke her right against self-incrimination if called. Judge Ward began with the simplest question. Mr. Pike, did your client know of the Rowan Vector Trust before the marriage Martin stood? He knew a trust existed, Your Honor, but he disputes its current scope and value. Simone handed the clerk the prenuptial agreement. His signature appears on page 17 beneath a schedule identifying the trust. Its intellectual property, future appreciation, and all licensing revenue as Ms. Krusing. Mercer's separate property. The judge read the page. Mr. Mercer initialed each subsection. Martin shifted. The company substantially increased the value of the licensed asset. That may be relevant to other claims. It does not make the existence of the trust a surprise. Then came the account transfer. Evan's position was that any spouse may move funds from a joint account. Simone agreed that joint ownership often allows either party to initiate transfers, then showed the court where the money went. An entity partly owned by Evan, concealed through a nominee trust. Hours before divorce service. Ability to press a transfer button is not immunity from fraudulent dissipation. She said, Mr. Mercer did not move money to pay taxes or preserve value. He moved every available dollar into an undisclosed company he controlled with the chief financial officer with whom he was having an affair. Martin objected to the reference to an affair. Simone offered the travel records under seal. The judge reviewed them and overruled the objection. Evan stared straight ahead. The most important moment came when Martin asked the court to compel permanent restoration of the Atlas route license. He argued that the company, its employees, and its investors would suffer irreparable harm if I retained the ability to suspend access. Judge Ward looked at me. Ms. Mercer, do you intend to shut down the platform? No. Your Honor, existing operations are protected for 30 days. I have offered full restoration when the transferred funds are returned. The audit proceeds. And unauthorized access to authorship records stops. Would you agree to extend continuity while the audit is completed? Yes. Provided the court prevents further transfer or deletion of assets and records. That answer mattered. Evan's filing portrayed me as someone using technology to destroy a company. I had no interest in destroying the work of 1,800 employees because one executive believed their livelihoods could shield his misconduct. The judge issued temporary orders before lunch. The $786,000 had to be returned within 24 hours. All remaining marital assets were frozen from unilateral transfer. Halcyon's accounts were placed under independent control. Evan and Sloane were prohibited from accessing Atlas route repositories. The continuity window was extended 60 days while the audit proceeded. Neither party could discuss Lily publicly or use her communications in media statements. Then Judge Ward addressed the divorce settlement Evan had offered. Mr. Mercer, she said, a spouse who transfers all liquid assets hours before service should not be surprised when the court views subsequent claims of cooperation with skepticism. It was the first time he looked at me. His expression did not show regret. It showed calculation interrupted. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions about the secret account. I walked past them with Simone and Daniel. We issued a written statement limited to 3 facts: the trust predated the marriage, company operations were protected, and an independent audit was underway. Evan stopped before the cameras. He blamed a hostile licensing structure, emotional retaliation, and unnamed advisors manipulating me. He did not mention returning the money. He did not mention Halcyon. He did not mention the hidden ledger. That afternoon, the money came back in pieces. $400,000 returned from Halcyon. $180,000 arrived from a brokerage account in Sloane's name. $90,000 came from Martin's client trust account, where it had been held as an advance for litigation and transaction fees. The final $116,000 came from an offshore payment service after the court threatened contempt. Every route told its own story. The transfer had not been a temporary relocation. As Evan claimed, the money had already been divided for legal warfare, personal protection, and a future life with Sloane. Daniel placed the restored funds into a court-restricted account. "You could request temporary support," he said. "You are entitled to access marital funds for living expenses." I looked around the home where every room held evidence of a shared life. "Use only what is necessary for household costs," and Lily, "I will pay my legal fees from the trust. You do not have to prove you can survive without marital money." I am not proving anything to Evan. I want the account preserved so no one can claim I answered financial abuse by taking everything for myself. Daniel nodded. "That distinction will matter later." It mattered sooner than we expected. 2 days after the hearing, a client contacted Mercer Fleet about a rebate discrepancy. The client was a national grocery chain that had paid millions in fuel optimization fees. According to its contract, if Atlas Route failed to achieve certain savings, a percentage of fees would be returned. Mercer Fleet's reports showed the targets had been met, as exceeding the public data. The raw platform data showed they had been missed in 6 regions. Someone had altered the reports. The discrepancy led auditors to a feature called Presentation Layer, a reporting module introduced by Sloane's finance team. It did not change routes or operations. It changed the numbers executives and clients saw after the routes were completed. Fuel waste was reclassified. Delayed deliveries were shifted into excluded categories. Driver overtime was moved outside comparison windows. The company had not merely diverted money after earning it. It had overstated the performance of my technology to collect fees it had not earned. That discovery placed me in an unexpected position. Atlas Route was my creation. Its reputation was now tied to manipulated claims. End of quote. If I restored the license without correcting the performance reports, I would preserve a lie. If I suspended it completely, innocent clients and employees would pay the price. I proposed a third option. The trust would grant Mercer Fleet a provisional 1-year license at a reduced royalty rate. In exchange, the company would refund affected clients, remove the presentation layer, publish independently verified results, and establish a research governance committee with employee and client representation. The license would no longer depend on my personal marital status. It would depend on transparent technical standards. The board accepted the framework in principle. Evan called it theft. "You are taking the company while pretending to save it," he told me during a court-ordered settlement conference. We sat in separate rooms connected by attorneys. His voice came through a speakerphone. "I am not taking the company," I said. "I do not want your chief executive position. I want the platform used under honest terms. You want the board to remove me permanently. The board will decide based on the audit. The board is terrified of losing your license. That is control. Control is emptying every account before handing your wife divorce papers because you believe poverty will force her signature. What I am doing is creating conditions you cannot secretly rewrite." He hung up. The mediator returned 10 minutes later with a new proposal. Evan would resign from Mercer Fleet. Return all misdirected funds. and transfer his interest in Halcyon. In exchange, he wanted $12 million from the Rowan Vector Trust, half the house equity, immunity from civil claims by the company, and a joint public statement praising his leadership. Simone read the proposal aloud, then placed it face down. "He still wants to be paid for leaving the scene of the fire," she said. We rejected it. That evening, Sloane appeared at my door. She stood beyond the security gate in a gray coat, holding no handbag and wearing no makeup. The woman who once entered every room as though photographers were waiting looked suddenly human and frightened. I spoke through the intercom. "Your attorney should contact mine." My attorney quit. "Then find another. Evan has copies of documents with my signatures. He told investigators I designed the entire reporting system." "Did you?" "I designed parts of it." "He approved everything." "That is not an answer." She looked directly at the camera. "I helped falsify performance reports. I moved money. I authorized invoices I knew were false. I told myself it was temporary and that the buyout would make everyone whole. I was wrong. I did not unlock the gate." "Why are you here?" "Because he plans to leave the country." She lifted a small envelope toward the camera. Inside were copies of passport applications, aircraft charter communications, and a private banking instruction. Evan had arranged to move $3.8 million from a nominee account into a bank in Belize. A charter flight was reserved for Friday night under the name of a consulting firm. "Why would you give me this?" I asked. Sloane's mouth tightened. "Because the second ticket was never for me." Evan had promised that once the buyout closed and the divorce was final, he and Sloane would build a life together. The flight reservation listed one passenger, Evan, the beneficiary designation on the offshore account named Lily, which allowed him to describe the transfer as family protection if questioned. Sloane had been useful for the affair. The shell companies, and the financial manipulations. She had never been part of his escape. "He used you." I said, "Yes. That does not erase what you did to me. The company, or the driver's fund. I know. I am not asking for erasure. I am asking for a chance to stop him before he leaves everyone else with the crimes." I instructed her to place the envelope in a secure Dropbox outside the gate. Then I called Simone, who contacted federal investigators. Sloane was taken to an interview that night. She did not leave as a hero. She left as a participant who had finally realized that cooperation was the only honest action remaining. The planned flight became the next trap. Investigators did not arrest Evan immediately. They watched the nominee account and the charter arrangements. They wanted to know who helped him, where the remaining assets were hidden, and whether he intended to remove company data. On Friday afternoon, Evan entered Mercer Fleet's headquarters using a temporary badge issued for a supervised legal meeting. He remained in the conference room for 23 minutes, then claimed he needed the restroom. Security footage showed him taking a service corridor toward the executive data suite. He carried a small black device in his pocket. The data suite door did not open. The access restrictions I requested at the first board meeting blocked his badge. Evan then used a maintenance code belonging to an employee who had retired 6 months earlier. That code worked. Inside, he connected the device to a backup server containing client contracts, source code snapshots, and audit communications. The cybersecurity team had configured the server as a monitored decoy after the first deletion attempt. Every file he copied was watermarked. Every command was recorded. He downloaded 46 gigabytes of data. When he reached the parking garage, federal agents were waiting. The video of his arrest did not come from reporters. It came from a driver's dashboard camera. Evan stood beside his silver car while agents opened his briefcase and removed the black device. He looked toward the headquarters windows, perhaps wondering which one belonged to me. I was not there. I was at Lily's school concert. She played cello in the second row. Eyes fixed on the conductor, My phone remained silent in my bag until the final piece ended. I applauded with every other parent, stood when the students bowed, and waited until Lily found me in the lobby. Only then did I read Simone's message. Evan detained. Data and passports recovered. Do not contact him. Lily saw my face. What happened? I took her hand and led her outside, away from classmates and cameras. Your father was arrested while trying to take protected company data, I said. She closed her eyes. Is it because of you? The question held fear, anger, and the desperate hope that adults could assign one cause to something unbearable. No, I said. It is because of choices he made. I provided evidence when required. But I did not make those choices. She began to cry. I held her beneath the school awning while rain struck the parking lot. For all my preparation, no account statement could protect a daughter from the moment her father became a defendant. That night, I sat beside Lily until she slept. Then I returned to the kitchen and found the white anniversary roses had begun to brown at the edges. I carried them outside, removed the dying petals, and placed the stems in the compost. The divorce had started with Evan believing he could leave me with nothing within 9 days. He had lost access to the company, the money he transferred, the data he tried to steal, and the narrative he had spent years constructing. But victory did not feel the way revenge stories promised. It felt like standing in a familiar house after a storm. Grateful, the roof remained, and grieving every room the water had entered. Evan was released the next afternoon under conditions that prohibited international travel, access to company systems, and contact with potential witnesses other than through counsel. He moved into a furnished apartment owned by Martin's firm. He did not call Lily. He sent one message saying he needed time to clear his name. Sloan entered a cooperation agreement. News outlets treated her as the glamorous insider who had turned against a fallen executive, but the documents were less flattering. She admitted approving false invoices, concealing the affair through company travel records, helping create Halcyon, and ordering deletion of authorship metadata. In return for truthful testimony and asset recovery, prosecutors would consider reduced charges. Maya Trent refused interviews and returned to work under a new reporting structure. When reporters called her brave, she replied through counsel that employees should not need bravery to report fraud. They should need a protected process. That sentence became the foundation of the reforms I proposed. Mercer Fleet's interim leadership formed 3 independent committees, one for financial controls, one for technical authorship and data integrity, and one for employee safety funds. Drivers elected 2 members. Engineers elected 2. Clients nominated an outside auditor. No chief executive could remove them without board approval. I accepted a temporary role as technical steward of Atlas Route for 1 year. I did not become chief executive. I did not take Evan's office. I moved into a modest workspace beside the engineering lab, where the walls were covered with route maps rather than magazine covers. On my first morning, a young data scientist named Priya Nair brought me a notebook. I found this in the archived storage room, she said. It was one of my original development journals. The cover was stained by coffee and diesel dust. Inside were pages of equations, sketches of depot layouts, and notes from conversations with drivers. In the margins, Evan had written sales ideas in blue ink. On one page, beneath a model for weather-adjusted delivery windows, he had written this could change everything. I ran my fingers across the words. There had been a time when he saw my work and felt wonder rather than ownership. Priya watched me. Should we put this in the company museum? No, I said. Scan it for the authorship archive. Then return it to me. The company does not need a museum about one person. It needs a record that shows how work actually happened. We rebuilt that record from source code commits, design reviews, depot tests, employee notes, and patent files. Hundreds of names appeared. My own was restored to the first line. But it was followed by the people who transformed a model into a living system. The corrected history did not make Evan irrelevant. It identified what he truly contributed: financing, sales, early partnerships, and expansion. Accuracy required, resisting the temptation to erase him just because he had erased me. When the new authorship page went live, Lily read it at the kitchen counter. "You still gave Dad credit," she said. "He earned credit for some things. After everything he did, truth is not a reward we give to good people. If I change the record because I am angry, I become another person using power to decide who existed." She thought about that. So, telling the truth does not mean pretending he was always bad. Exactly. The divorce discovery began in earnest. Evan demanded every trust statement, tax return, and license payment from the previous 15 years. Simone provided them. In return, we requested his communications with Sloan, halcyon records, nominee accounts, buyout documents, and all drafts connected to the planned mental health narrative. Martin attempted to withhold many of those records as privileged legal advice. Judge Ward appointed a special master to review them. The review revealed that Martin had not merely advised Evan about lawful divorce planning. He had helped design shell ownership, drafted misleading board disclosures, and held transferred marital funds in his client account without informing me or the court. The state bar opened an investigation. Martin withdrew from the divorce case. Evan hired a litigation team from New York that specialized in high-net-worth disputes. Their strategy was sophisticated. They conceded the trust was separate property, but argued that Mercer Fleet's commercialization efforts had increased its value by $26 million. Therefore, Evan claimed the marital estate deserved reimbursement for the appreciation. Daniel explained the flaw. The trust received royalties under contracts that compensated it for use of the platform. Mercer Fleet had also received enormous value revenue, investment, and market growth. Both sides had already exchanged consideration. Evan could not treat the company's success as an unpaid gift to me while treating my technology as something the company had been entitled to use for free. The larger problem was that some royalty reports had been falsified downward. For 7 years, Mercer Fleet had underreported revenue categories subject to the license. The hidden presentation layer was not only used to overstate results to clients. A different internal classification understated licensing revenue owed to the trust. Evan's company had charged customers for Atlas Route features while labeling those charges as consulting services outside the royalty calculation. The unpaid amount, with interest, exceeded $6.2 million. When Daniel showed me the number, I felt no satisfaction. If the trust demands immediate payment, the company could face a liquidity crisis. I said, "You are legally entitled to it." Legally entitled and strategically wise are not always the same. We proposed converting the debt into preferred equity held by the trust, with voting rights limited to compliance and authorship issues. The arrangement protected cash for payroll and client refunds, while ensuring the company could not again treat the license owner as invisible. The board approved it after independent valuation. Evan called from his attorney's conference room during mediation. "Now you do own the company," he said. "You planned this from the beginning." I accepted equity instead of draining $6 million from a company already repairing your fraud. You could have waived the debt. The employees donated wages to a safety fund you diverted. Why should the trust donate unpaid royalties to preserve your personal shares? Because we built it together. The word together hung between us. "We did," I said. "That is why your decision to empty the accounts and erase me was not only theft. It was betrayal of something we actually created together." For a moment, his breathing changed. I wondered whether remorse had finally reached him. Then he said, I will never let you keep control." The call ended. 3 weeks later, Lily received a package at school. Inside was a handwritten letter from Evan and a flash drive. The letter said he trusted her to preserve the truth about her father because everyone else had been manipulated by my money. The flash drive contained edited clips from family videos, company speeches, and private conversations. In one clip, I said, "Sometimes I wish the company would disappear." The sentence came from a night 8 years earlier when Evan missed Lily's birthday during a funding crisis. The complete sentence had been, "Sometimes I wish the company would disappear for 1 week so we could remember we are a family." He had cut away the context. Another clip showed me telling Daniel to keep the trust separate. The original discussion concerned tax compliance. Evan's version made it sound like a plan to hide assets. Lily brought the package to me without opening the drive on her own. "He wants me to post it," she said. "He says people need to hear your real voice." I felt anger rise with a clarity that frightened me. Not because the clips could damage my reputation, because he had turned our daughter's school into another delivery channel for pressure. Simone filed a motion to enforce the no-contact provisions regarding litigation. Judge Ward ordered that all financial and legal communications to Lily cease. Evan was permitted ordinary parental contact, but forbidden to discuss evidence, settlements, media strategy, or company matters. He violated the order within 48 hours by leaving a voice message saying the judge had been purchased by the Rowan Trust. The court suspended unsupervised contact temporarily. Lily blamed herself. "If I had not shown you the package, maybe he could still call me." The order changed because of what he chose to send. Not because you told the truth, but he is alone. Being accountable can feel like being abandoned. They are not the same. We found a therapist experienced in family betrayal and public scandal. Lily initially refused to speak during sessions. She sat with her arms folded, answering every question with one word. Over time, she began describing the father. She missed the man who taught her to ride a bicycle, built elaborate science fair displays, and danced badly in the kitchen. She also described the father who asked her to choose his story over mine. The therapist never told her which version to love. She helped Lily understand that both existed. I began therapy too. For years, I had considered my silence a rational choice. Therapy forced me to see where rationality had become avoidance. I knew Evan was taking increasing credit. I knew he dismissed my technical opinions in public and praised them in private. I knew Sloane's role had expanded beyond finance. I did not confront any of it because I feared conflict would damage the family. My fear did not preserve the family. It taught Evan that concealment had no cost until the cost became catastrophic. That realization did not make me responsible for his fraud. It made me responsible for what I would do differently in the future. The criminal investigation expanded. Federal agents traced funds from the inflated acquisitions into luxury property, political donations, and a private loan to one of Mercer Fleet's directors. The director resigned and admitted that Evan had financed his failing business in exchange for favorable votes on compensation and acquisitions. The board ordered a review of every major decision from the previous 5 years. One decision involved a distribution center outside Memphis. Engineers had warned that the facility's emergency ventilation system was inadequate for the battery storage area. Upgrading it would have delayed opening and reduced Evan's annual performance bonus. The warning was reclassified as a future recommendation. 6 months later, a battery fire injured 4 workers. The company settled the claims quietly and blamed a subcontractor. The original engineering report was found in Sloane's deleted files. When I read the names of the injured workers, the divorce suddenly seemed small. Evan's need to appear successful had not only taken money and credit, it had shaped decisions that placed people in physical danger. I visited the Memphis facility with Rosa. We met the workers, reviewed the new safety plan, and reopened the investigation into the fire. One injured technician, Marcus Green. Had scars across both hands. He listened while company lawyers explained the independent review. Then he looked at me. Are you here because you care? Or because this helps you beat your husband? The question was fair. Both things can be true around the same event. I said, the investigation began because his other conduct was exposed. I am here because what happened to you was wrong, whether it helps my case or not. You do not owe me trust. The company has to earn it through what happens next. Marcus nodded once. That is the first honest answer anybody from headquarters has given me. The company reopened settlements voluntarily, funded medical care, and gave workers representation on the safety committee. Those choices reduced short-term profit. They also began rebuilding something no software could optimize: credibility. At home, the anniversary flowers were gone. The divorce papers had multiplied into boxes, and Evan's side of the closet remained half empty because a court order prevented either of us from disposing of property. I moved his clothes into garment bags without throwing anything away. One evening, I found the suit he wore at our wedding. A paper had been left in the inside pocket. It was the toast he never delivered because he became too emotional at the reception. The handwriting was young and uneven. Claire sees patterns where the rest of us see noise. She makes impossible roads look simple. I promise never to stand in front of her light. I promise to stand beside it. I sat on the closet floor holding the page. People asked when Evan changed. They wanted a date. A deal. An amistris. A moment when ambition became corruption. The truth was harder. He changed through hundreds of rewarded choices. A journalist credited him alone. And he did not correct the article. An investor dismissed my role. And he decided clarification was inconvenient. A bonus depended on hiding a safety warning. And he called it temporary. A transfer could make me financially helpless. And he convinced himself helplessness would make the divorce efficient. There was no single cliff. There was a staircase he descended while insisting each step was practical. I placed the toast in my own evidence box. Not for court, but for Lily someday. She deserved to know that her father had once understood the promise he later broke. The forensic audit concluded after 4 months. Its report filled 800 pages. The findings included unauthorized transfers, false client reporting, underpaid royalties, acquisition kickbacks, misuse of safety funds, manipulated board votes, attempted destruction of authorship records, and improper access to protected data. Mercer Fleet announced that Evan's termination was permanent and for cause. His unvested shares were canceled. Vested shares remained frozen, pending civil claims. Sloan was terminated and barred from serving as an officer under the terms of her cooperation. Martin Pike resigned from his firm before the disciplinary hearing. End of Litis Semen's firm before the disciplinary hearing. The company offered me the chief executive position. I declined. Judith Kane asked why during a private board meeting. You understand the technology, the history, and the reforms better than anyone, she said. That is precisely why I should not hold every role. We are correcting a company built around one celebrated executive, replacing him with another central figure. Even me would repeat the structure. Rosa became chief operating officer. The board recruited an external chief executive with experience in regulated infrastructure. I remained technical steward and chair of the authorship committee for a limited term. The decision confused reporters. They expected a story in which the wronged wife took the corner office and watched her husband fall. But power had already taught our family what happens when one person's identity becomes inseparable from an institution. I did not need Evan's chair to prove I had not been nothing. My name on the first design had always been enough. Just when the company crisis appeared to be stabilizing, Evan produced the document he believed would reverse everything. During a divorce deposition, his new attorney placed a 12-page amendment on the table. The final page carried my signature. witnessed and notarized 6 years earlier. The amendment appeared to transfer all Atlas route licensing rights from Rowan Vector Trust into a marital holding company upon any separation lasting more than 30 days. If valid, the clause would give Evan a claim to the platform and undermine the trust structure that had protected it. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who had worked in Martin Pike's office. The date matched a week when Evan and I refinanced the Lake Norman property. I remembered signing stacks of documents in our kitchen while Martin's assistant pointed to tabs. I did not remember this amendment. Evan watched me across the deposition table. For the first time in months, confidence returned to his face. "You signed it," he said. "You just did not bother to read." The sentence was designed to echo his defense of the empty accounts. In his world, any signature obtained through trust became permanent consent to every hidden consequence. Simone ended the deposition and sent the amendment to a forensic document examiner. The paper, ink, and notary stamp were consistent with the date. My signature was genuine. For 48 hours, it appeared Evan had found the one document capable of placing Atlas Route inside the marital estate. Daniel called me late on Sunday. "Do you remember what else you signed that week?" "Mortgage papers. Insurance updates. A consent to move the lake property into an LLC. Do you have copies?" I searched our archive and found the closing binder. One document was missing its signature page, an authorization allowing the bank to obtain insurance information. The page before it ended with the exact same formatting and footer code as the alleged trust amendment. The forensic examiner overlaid the staple holes. They matched. My genuine signature page had been removed from the insurance authorization and attached to a fabricated amendment. The page numbers were printed later. Microscopic toner analysis showed that pages 1 through 11 came from a different printer than page 12. Metadata recovered from Martin's document system revealed the amendment had been created 3 months before the divorce, not 6 years earlier. The notary initially denied involvement. Then investigators showed her an email from Martin instructing her to recreate an old acknowledgement block for file completeness. She admitted applying the stamp without seeing me sign. The forged amendment transformed Martin's disciplinary problem into a criminal one. It also revealed the depth of Evan's preparation. He had not merely decided to use the courts aggressively. He had manufactured a document years after obtaining my signature under another purpose and intended to present it as proof that I had surrendered the asset protecting me. At the next hearing, Judge Ward examined the forensic report with visible anger. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "did you know this amendment was assembled using a signature page taken from another document?" Evan invoked his right not to answer because of the criminal investigation. The judge struck the amendment, imposed sanctions, and referred the matter to prosecutors. She also granted me temporary possession of the marital home and expanded restrictions on Evan's asset transfers. Outside court, his attorney announced that Evan had been misled by former counsel. Martin announced that Evan had directed the strategy. The two men who once sat together smiling across my breakfast table began accusing each other before the cameras. Sloan watched from a federal interview room and provided the missing link. She had heard Evan discuss the signature page months earlier. In a recorded call, he told Martin, "Claire signs whatever looks administrative. Find something old and make the language fit." The call was devastating, but another line mattered more to me. Martin asked whether Evan worried I would recognize the document. Evan answered, "She remembers equations, not her own life." For 15 years, he had benefited from my ability to hold thousands of technical details in my mind. He chose to interpret my trust in him as evidence that I was absent from myself. The criminal indictment arrived 6 weeks later. Evan was charged with wire fraud, conspiracy, theft from an employee benefit program, obstruction, attempted destruction of records, and unlawful transfer of protected data. Additional state charges addressed forgery and fraudulent conveyance. Martin faced conspiracy, évidence fabrication, and professional misconduct charges. Sloan pleaded guilty to reduced counts and agreed to testify. The indictment did not make the divorce easier. It made every conversation more public and every decision more complicated. Evan's legal fees consumed his separate accounts. He asked the family court to release frozen marital funds for his defense. Simone argued that he was entitled to reasonable representation but not unlimited access to money he had attempted to hide. Judge Ward authorized a capped amount under court supervision. I agreed. Some people criticized that decision. They believed I should leave him unable to afford counsel after he tried to leave me unable to afford groceries. But justice that depends on an opponent being defenseless is only revenge wearing formal clothes. Evan needed competent representation, so the eventual outcome could not be dismissed as something purchased by my trust. The same principle guided the divorce negotiations. I did not seek all of his remaining shares. I requested restoration of misdirected marital funds, my share of legitimate marital property, reimbursement of trust royalties, and compensation for legal costs caused by fraud and forgery. I asked for primary decision-making authority regarding Lily's therapy and education while preserving a path for a relationship with her father if professionals considered contact safe. Evan refused every proposal. He insisted he deserved half the trust because his leadership made Atlas Root famous. He demanded that I publicly state the affair began after our separation. He wanted the company to describe his departure as voluntary. He asked for the house because, he said, the architecture suited his public identity. The house had become a symbol to him, just as the company had. He valued spaces by what they said about the person occupying them. I began imagining a life without it. The property was beautiful stone walls, old trees, a library I designed, and a kitchen where Lily grew from a toddler on a wooden stool into a teenager who could cook better than either parent. But it was also the place where Evan served me divorce papers beside accounts he had emptied. Keeping it solely to prove he had failed would turn my future into a monument to his betrayal. I proposed selling the house after Lily finished the school year. Half the legitimate equity would enter the marital estate. My portion would fund a foundation for technical education and financial abuse prevention. Evan could use his portion for legal obligations or rebuilding his life. He called the proposal theatrical. You want everyone to applaud you for giving money away, he said during mediation. No. I want to stop organizing my life around what you might think about it. That was the first sentence in the divorce process that felt entirely free. Mercer Fleet's client refunds began. Some contracts were terminated. Revenue fell. The new leadership published corrected performance data, including failures. Analysts predicted the company would lose its premium valuation. It did. The billion-dollar mythology collapsed into a company worth significantly less but built on numbers clients could verify. Investors complained. Employees worried. Yet within 6 months, customer retention stabilized because clients preferred honest limits to manipulated perfection. Atlas Root itself improved. Engineers removed the reporting layers Sloan's team had used and created an open audit interface. Drivers could see how schedules were calculated and flag impossible assumptions. Weather delays, rest requirements, and maintenance warnings could no longer be quietly reclassified to make executive dashboards look better. The changes reduced nominal efficiency by 4%. They reduced driver fatigue incidents by 19%. That was the kind of number I wanted attached to my name. One afternoon, Marcus Green from the Memphis facility visited the lab. His hands had healed enough for him to return to technical work, though scar tissue limited movement. He watched a demonstration of the safety interface. You know what the old system did? He asked. It made every warning feel like an inconvenience to somebody's bonus. The new system cannot make people ethical. I said, it can make ignoring a warning visible. Sometimes visibility is enough to make cowards behave. He joined the Employees Safety Committee the following month. Lily's relationship with Evan remained suspended while the criminal case advanced. He wrote letters through the therapist. Some blamed me. Some apologized without naming what he had done. One finally said, "I used you because I believed your love guaranteed access to you." Lily read that sentence twice. Is that an apology? It is part of one. The therapist said, an apology also requires responsibility without bargaining and changed behavior over time. Lily wrote back, I love you. But I will not be evidence for your defense. Do not ask me to choose which parent deserves a future. Evan did not reply for a month. When he finally did, the letter contained no legal arguments. He described teaching her to ride a bicycle and said he hoped someday she would let him listen to her play cello again. The therapist approved a supervised video call. I was not present. That mattered. Their relationship could not become another extension of the divorce. Afterward, Lily cried for an hour and then asked to order pizza. Grief and ordinary hunger occupied the same evening. Healing rarely arrived with music or a final speech. It arrived as the ability to keep living after a painful conversation. The criminal trial began almost a year after the anniversary morning. By then, the White Roses, Zéro Balance, and Breakfast Room had become images repeated in opening statements. Prosecutors argued that Evan's divorce scheme was not separate from his corporate fraud. It was the final stage of a long pattern. He believed records, money, people, and even family could be rearranged to protect the story of his success. The defense argued that Mercer Fleet's accounting was aggressive but common. The licensing dispute was ambiguous, and Sloan was the true architect of the shell companies. They described me as a wealthy spouse who used contractual leverage to destroy Evan after discovering an affair. Sloan testified for 3 days. She did not minimize her role. She explained how the affair began during a conference in Seattle, how Evan promised to leave me after the management buyout, and how they created Halcyon to collect money they called future compensation. She described falsifying client reports, diverting safety funds, and planning the pre-divorce transfer. The defense showed messages where she encouraged Evan to freeze my cards and called me the invisible wife. She admitted writing them. Were you jealous of Mrs. Mercer? The defense attorney asked. Yes. Did you want her marriage? Her home. And her wealth. I wanted the version of her life Evan advertised to me. I did not understand that he had built that version by deleting her from it. Then Maya testified. She explained the hidden ledger, the deletion orders, and the anonymous upload. The defense suggested she acted out of resentment after being denied a promotion. I was denied a promotion, Maya said. I was also instructed to hide theft. Both facts can exist. Only one is why I saved the records. Rosa testified about the early development of Atlas Route. Marcus Green testified about the safety report. Clients testified about false performance claims. Daniel traced the money through charts so clear that even complicated transfers looked like footprints across fresh snow. I testified last. The courtroom expected a betrayed wife's anger. Prosecutors asked me to explain the trust, the license, and the joint accounts. I described the origin of Atlas Route, my mother's insistence on structural protection, and the reason the continuity window existed. I explained that Evan knew the trust from the beginning and signed every agreement. Then they played the recording where he said I would sign before lunch because I could not tolerate conflict. Why did you not sign? The prosecutor asked. Because by then I understood that peace purchased through surrender is not peace. It is a payment schedule. The defense attorney approached with a copy of the $28 million statement. Mrs. Mercer, you were never in danger of poverty. Were you financially? No. So when your husband transferred the joint accounts, you suffered no actual hardship. The fact that I had protected assets does not make taking shared assets lawful. A burglar does not become innocent because the homeowner has another house. You could restore the platform license at any time. I extended continuity and offered restoration under transparent conditions. Conditions that removed your husband from power. The board removed him after an independent audit. An audit you demanded. Yes, because you were angry about his affair. I looked at Sloan. Then at Evan. The affair told me my marriage was ending. The bank transfer. Forged document. Altered records. Safety fund theft. And data removal told me an investigation was necessary. Anger did not create those documents. The defense attorney placed the statement down. You want this jury to believe you did not seek revenge. I wanted my money returned. My work credited. Employees protected. Clients repaid. And records preserved. Some people experience accountability as revenge because they expected immunity. No one spoke for several seconds. The trial lasted 7 weeks. The jury deliberated for 4 days. Evan was convicted on most counts. Acquitted on 2. And found not guilty of 1 charge tied solely to Sloan's testimony. The mixed verdict mattered. It showed the jury had examined each allegation rather than simply punishing a disliked man. Martin was convicted in a separate proceeding. Sloan received a reduced sentence that included prison, restitution, and a long prohibition on serving as a corporate officer. At sentencing, Evan finally spoke without a prepared public relations statement. I believed the company would collapse if people saw how much of it began with Claire. He said, so I kept making the story smaller around her and larger around me. Eventually, I could not tell the difference between protecting the company and protecting myself. I hurt employees, clients, my wife, and my daughter. I cannot repair that by saying I was under pressure. He did not ask me to forgive him. That was the first honest thing he had offered without attaching a condition. The divorce concluded 3 months after the criminal sentencing. By then, the zero balance accounts had been restored, traced, and divided under court supervision. The house sold to a family with 3 children who loved the library and promised to keep the old oak tree in the yard. I kept my original development journals, my mother's letters, personal photographs, and the wedding toast from Evan's suit pocket. Evan received his lawful portion of the remaining marital property after restitution liens and legal obligations were accounted for. The Rowan Vector Trust remained my separate property. Not because I outsmarted the court or concealed money, but because the documents had always said what they said. Evan's signature, tax returns, licensing certifications, and repeated acknowledgments established that fact beyond argument. The account he missed was not a trick created on the morning of the divorce. It was a boundary created before the marriage and maintained through years when neither of us expected it would be tested. Judge Ward approved the settlement after asking whether both parties understood it. Evan appeared by video from a federal facility. His hair was shorter. The expensive suits were gone. He looked older than he had at the breakfast table. Though only 15 months had passed. I understand, he said. The judge turned to me. Ms. Eroven, do you understand that the marriage will be dissolved today? I had returned to my maiden name in the filings. Yes. Your Honor. There was no dramatic sound when the order became final. No music stopped. No executive stood. A clerk stamped a document. The judge moved to the next case. And 15 years became a legal status recorded in a database. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked whether I felt victorious. I feel finished with the litigation. I said, that is not the same as feeling victorious about the end of a family. Then I went to meet Lily for lunch. She had chosen a university in Boston with a strong music program and an economics department she admired. The trust could have paid every expense without effort. But she applied for scholarships and accepted a campus job in the concert office. You do not have to work for tuition. I reminded her. I know. I want a job that belongs to me. I understood exactly what she meant. We moved into a smaller home near the city center. It had no formal breakfast room, no marble foyer, and no office designed for magazine photographs. The kitchen opened into the living area. Sunlight reached every corner. Lily chose the room overlooking a row of maple trees. I chose the room with enough wall space for the first atlas route map. On our first night, we ate takeout on the floor because the table had not arrived. Lily raised a paper cup of lemonade. "To the account Dad missed," she said. I smiled. "To the boundary he underestimated." Same thing. Not quite. Money gave us safety. The boundary gave us freedom. The difference mattered. Mercer Fleet completed its first full year under the provisional license with lower revenue and stronger operations. Client refunds totaled $11 million. Restitution and recovered assets covered most of the amount. The company restored the driver safety fund with independent oversight and named it after the employee whose death originally inspired it. With his family's permission. The new chief executive, Elaine Foster, reported compensation and safety metrics side by side. Bonuses depended not only on revenue but on data accuracy, injury reduction, employee retention, and verified client outcomes. No single metric could be adjusted by the chief executive's office without committee approval. The company's valuation never returned to the inflated billion-dollar peak promoted under Evan. It settled at a lower figure supported by audited performance. Some investors left. Others arrived because they trusted the governance. I spent less time discussing markets and more time in the research lab. We developed a new version of Atlas Route that allowed drivers to contest scheduling assumptions in real time. The earliest model had treated routes as mathematical problems. Years of experience taught me that every route passed through a human body that became tired, hungry, frightened, or responsible for someone waiting at home. The technology improved when the people affected by it could answer back. That principle shaped Rowan Commons, the research and training center I established using a portion of the trust's licensing income. It offered fellowships to engineers, accountants, designers, and scientists returning to work after caregiving, illness, divorce, or other interruptions. Too many talented people disappeared from professional histories because they stepped away when life demanded it. When they returned, others had claimed the work, the network, or the story. Our fellowship agreements protected authorship, licensing rights, and credit from the beginning. Every project maintained a transparent contribution ledger. No founder could later decide that one person's absence made their earlier work ownerless. Maya Trent became Rowan Commons' Director of Ethics and Reporting Systems. She accepted only after confirming that her position included authority to investigate me. "Especially you," she said during negotiations. Institutions become dangerous when founders believe good intentions make oversight unnecessary. Agreed. Marcus Green joined the safety design team. Priya led the open audit interface. Rosa served on the advisory board while continuing as Mercer Fleet's chief operating officer. Sloan wrote to me from prison once. The letter contained no request for forgiveness. She described teaching financial literacy in a reentry program and acknowledged that knowledge had never been her problem. She had understood the numbers and chosen the lie because the lie offered status. I answered with 3 sentences. "I received your letter. I hope your future choices reflect what you now understand. I am not able to offer a personal relationship. Boundaries did not require cruelty or access." Evan's first letter to me arrived shortly after the divorce became final. It was 6 pages long. He apologized for the affair, the accounts, the forged document, the public campaign, and using Lily. He also explained his fear of becoming invisible after the company learned how much began with my work. I read the letter carefully. Then I placed it beside the wedding toast. The 2 documents belonged together. One contained a promise from a man who believed he would stand beside my light. The other contained an apology from a man who had spent years trying to cover it. Neither erased the other. I did not write back immediately. Months later, after discussing it with my therapist and Lily, I sent a brief response. I acknowledge your apology. I believe you now understand some of the harm. Forgiveness, accountability, and renewed access are separate questions. I wish you the courage to continue telling the truth when it brings you no advantage. He never asked me for money. That small fact did not repair our marriage. It showed that consequences had finally interrupted the old transaction. Lily began supervised visits at the federal facility during her first college year. I drove her twice but waited at a nearby cafe. She returned from the first visit silent. After the second, she said Evan had asked about her classes without mentioning the case. After the third, she showed me a music composition he had written for cello, using notes corresponding to the numbers in her birthday. It is not very good, she said. He was never good at music. She laughed. And the sound carried affection without denial. Their relationship would never return to childhood innocence. It might become something honest enough to survive. Mine with Evan would remain at a distance. We communicated only when necessary regarding Lily and unresolved restitution issues. He lost the right to call me wife, partner, or obstacle. I no longer needed him to call me inventor. The public record, patents, contracts, and company history now did that without permission. 2 years after the divorce, Mercer Fleet held a public technology forum at Rowan Commons. The event did not feature a dramatic product reveal. Engineers presented failures alongside improvements. Drivers challenged assumptions from the audience. Clients reviewed audit data. Fellows demonstrated tools created after returning from career interruptions. At the end, Priya asked me to speak about the origin of Atlas Route. I stood beside the first hand-drawn map. The paper had faded. Some lines were crossed out. In one corner, a coffee stain covered part of a fuel calculation. People like clean origin stories. I told the audience, they like one genius. One breakthrough. One name large enough to fit on a magazine cover. Real work is rarely that neat. Atlas Route began with equations I wrote. Problems, drivers explained. Sales. Evan made. Tests, Rosa organized. Code teams improved. And mistakes clients forced us to confront. The danger was never that collaboration made authorship complicated. The danger was that complexity became an excuse for the person with the loudest voice to claim everything. A fellow in the front row asked how to protect work inside a marriage or partnership without destroying trust. Contracts do not destroy trust. I said, they preserve clarity when memory, power, or incentives change. A good boundary is not a prediction that someone will betray you. It is an agreement that no one will need to become powerless for the relationship to continue. After the forum, an older woman waited to speak with me. Her husband had transferred their savings into his brother's company before filing for divorce. She had no secret trust, no patent license, and no accountant arriving with a $28 million statement. Your story makes people like me feel foolish, she said quietly. You had an account that saved you. I did not. Her words stopped me. Public versions of my story had focused on the spectacular reveal zero balances. Divorce papers. Second statement. Evan's face losing color. That scene was satisfying because it reversed power in seconds. But most people facing financial abuse did not have $28 million hidden behind a legal boundary. You are not foolish, I told her, and the account did not make his conduct wrong. It only made it harder for him to succeed. What he did would have been wrong if I had $5. She explained that she could not afford a forensic accountant. Rowan Commons was a technical center, not a legal service. But that conversation led us to create the Clear Ledger Project with independent nonprofit partners. The program helped people preserve bank records, understand joint account risks, locate low-cost legal aid, secure credit reports, and recognize signs of pre-divorce asset dissipation. We designed it carefully. No automated promise told people that every transfer was illegal or every spouse was abusive. Trained professionals explained jurisdiction, evidence, safety planning, and the difference between suspicious behavior and proven misconduct. The woman who challenged me became one of the program's advisors. Her name was Denise Walker. She recovered part of her savings through court orders, found work after 12 years away from employment, and later trained volunteers to speak with people who felt ashamed. "The first thing I tell them," she said, "is that being trusted is not the same as being stupid. The person who breaks trust owns that choice." I wrote those words on a card and kept it in my desk. The Rowan Vector Trust continued to grow. But I stopped thinking of the balance as a secret fortress. Its purpose changed. It funded research, protected licensing independence, supported Lily's future, and financed programs with governance that did not depend on my personal goodness. Daniel remained the accountant. Each quarter, he placed statements before me and reviewed every line. The first page still carried the balance that once drained the color from Evan's face. I no longer looked at that number first. I looked at the sections showing grants, employee ownership, client refunds, and reserves. Money could be hidden, stolen, worshipped, or used. Its moral meaning came from structure and choice. On the 3rd anniversary of the morning, Evan served me. I woke before sunrise. I made coffee and opened the banking app from habit. The old joint accounts no longer existed. The restored funds had been divided, taxes paid, and records archived. There was no zero balance waiting to frighten me. Lily called from Boston while walking to rehearsal. "Do you remember what day it is?" she asked. "Yes." "Are you sad?" I looked through the kitchen window at a city beginning to wake. "A little. Mostly I am grateful I do not live inside that morning anymore." "Did you ever think Dad would actually leave you with nothing?" I considered the question. He had tried to take money, credit, security, professional identity, and our daughter's trust. He failed to take those things completely. But the marriage he destroyed had contained real history, effort, and love. No account could return that unchanged. "He did leave me without something," I said. "He left me without the illusion that love alone prevents exploitation." That sounds terrible. It was painful. It was also useful. Love needs honesty, boundaries, and the freedom to say no. Without those, love becomes a word someone uses while reaching for your signature. Lily was quiet. Then she said, "I have to go. We are rehearsing the ugly piece Dad wrote. I thought you said it was not very good." "It is improving." After the call, I opened the framed copy of the first Atlas route design hanging beside my desk. My name appeared at the bottom in pencil, Claire Rowan. Version 1. Ling. The letters were small, almost apologetic. I had been 26 and uncertain whether the work mattered. Evan later built a company around it, then behaved as though scale had traveled backward through time and made him the original source. He emptied our accounts believing money would determine who could speak. He filed for divorce, believing papers could convert betrayal into strategy. He smiled beside a lawyer because he thought a 0 on a screen described my value. Then Daniel placed the second statement on the table. The most important line was never the balance. It was my name. I believed that would be the end of the story. It was the end of my marriage. The end of Evan's control of Mercer Fleet. And the end of the lie that he had created Atlas Route alone. But institutions do not become safe simply because one dishonest leader leaves. New people arrive with new language for old appetites. 4 years after the divorce, Mercer Fleet received an acquisition offer from Titan Ridge Partners, a private equity group known for buying transportation companies and combining their technology. The price was generous enough to make every shareholder listen. Titan Ridge offered a 40% premium, promised international expansion, and described Atlas Route as the crown jewel of a global logistics platform. The proposal required Rowan Vector Trust to sell the license permanently. For the first time, the account Evan missed could become liquid on a scale even he had never imagined. Titan Ridge offered $110 million for the intellectual property, future improvements, and all authority to audit or suspend use. Daniel placed the offer beside the quarterly statement. Financially, it is extraordinary, he said. Structurally, they want complete ownership. No independent license. No employee authorship committee. No client audit rights beyond regulation. The board argued that the sale would secure jobs by connecting Mercer Fleet to a larger network. Some employees supported it. Others feared closures. Investors reminded me that the trust's duty included preserving value, not only principles. I did not reject the offer immediately. Refusing to consider a transaction because it made me uncomfortable would be another form of personal control. We opened a 90-day review. Titan Ridge received access to verified performance data, but not source code. Employees held meetings. Clients submitted concerns. Independent advisors evaluated the price and the operational plan. Then I received a letter from Evan. His correspondence had become infrequent and ordinary. He wrote about Lily, books he read, and the accounting courses he taught in a prison education program. This letter contained only 2 paragraphs. Titan Ridge used to finance acquisitions through a group called North Quay. North Quay was discussed during the management buyout. I do not know whether the relationship still exists. Check the beneficial owners before you sign anything. He included no demand for credit and no suggestion that helping should change our relationship. I sent the letter to Maya and the Independent Transaction Committee. The review found that North Quay held a minority economic interest in one Titan Ridge fund through layers of institutional investors. That alone was not suspicious. Deeper analysis revealed that one North Quay advisor had also created nominee structures for Halcyon. More troubling, Titan Ridge's internal model assumed that within 18 months of acquisition, driver input committees would be dissolved, technical governance consolidated, and 22% of dispatch and safety staff eliminated. The public offer promised expansion. The private model extracted value by removing the systems built after Evan's fraud. At the final presentation, Titan Ridge executives insisted the documents were preliminary scenarios rather than commitments. All acquisition models contain cost opportunities. One partner said, "That does not mean every opportunity will be executed." Why is the Employee Safety Committee categorized as duplicative administration? Marcus Green asked. Because safety functions would be centralized. Centralized under people whose bonus model counts us as a cost. The partners smiled politely. Scale requires difficult choices. I had heard that sentence in many forms. Evan called false reporting strategic presentation. Sloan called diverted money future compensation. Martin called forged authority file completeness. Every abusive structure introduced itself as practicality. The trust rejected the license sale. Titan Ridge increased the offer by $20 million. We rejected it again. Some investors sued, claiming the trust had interfered with maximizing shareholder value. The litigation tested whether the licensing governance provisions served a legitimate commercial purpose or merely allowed me to impose personal ethics on the company. This time, I did not stand alone as the injured spouse protecting her work. Drivers, clients, engineers, lenders, and independent directors testified about the measurable value of transparent data, safety oversight, and stable licensing. They showed that the governance structure reduced litigation, improved customer retention, and protected the company from executive misconduct. The court found that rejecting the sale was a lawful exercise of contractual rights. The decision did not declare our values universally correct. It confirmed that Titan Ridge had never owned an entitlement to buy them. Afterward, Mercer Fleet created an employee ownership plan. Rowan Vector Trust sold a limited portion of its preferred equity to the plan at an independently reviewed price and financed part of the purchase over 10 years. Drivers, technicians, dispatchers, and engineers became direct owners. The arrangement was not a fairy tale gift. Employees earned shares through service and purchased others through payroll elections. Governance rights were real. Financial risks were explained. No more Section NA 10(1). No speech promised that ownership would eliminate conflict. It changed who had standing when conflict arrived. Lily attended the first employee-owner meeting after graduating from university. She had chosen music technology, combining composition with software design. She joked that she had inherited the family's inability to keep art and mathematics separate. During the meeting, an employee asked whether she planned to inherit control of Rowan Vector Trust. Lily looked at me before answering. "I may inherit an economic interest someday," she said. "I will not inherit automatic authority over people who built the company. Governance has to be earned and supervised. My family has already tested the alternative." The room laughed gently, but her answer was serious. That evening, we walked through the original depot where Rosa had kept the first route boards. The building had been preserved as a training facility, not a museum. New dispatchers learned manual planning there before using Atlas Route, so they understood what the software simplified and what it could miss. On one wall hung photographs from the company's early years. Evan appeared in several. I appeared in several. Rosa, drivers, engineers, and warehouse workers filled the rest. Lily stopped before a photograph of her father and me beside the first truck equipped with our test system. We were young, tired, and laughing. "Do you wish you could go back before everything went wrong?" she asked. "Sometimes." "Would you still marry him?" The question had no clean answer. Without the marriage, there would be no Lily. There might be no Mercer Fleet. No Atlas Route at scale. No Rowan Commons. With the marriage came love, partnership, betrayal, and years of repair. I would not choose the harm. I said, "But I cannot separate every good thing from every painful thing and pretend life offered them on different shelves. I can only choose what I do with what happened." She took my hand. Evan was released after serving part of his sentence and completing required programs. He moved to a small city in Virginia and worked for a nonprofit that taught basic accounting and employment skills to people returning from prison. His professional restrictions prevented him from serving as an officer or handling investment funds. He asked to attend Lily's graduate recital. The decision belonged to her. She invited him with conditions: no media, no discussion of the company, and no attempt to turn the event into reconciliation theater. He accepted. I saw him for the first time in years across the concert hall lobby. He wore an inexpensive gray suit. His hair was almost entirely silver. For a moment, we looked at each other as two people who remembered the same rooms from incompatible lives. "Hello, Claire," he said. "Hello, Evan." He did not call me his wife. He did not mention the trust. He did not apologize again because the day was not about him. We sat on opposite sides of the aisle while Lily performed a composition called Separate Ledgers. The piece began with two melodies sharing the same rhythm. Gradually, one grew louder and attempted to absorb the other. The quieter melody disappeared, then returned through a different instrument, no longer asking to be allowed space. By the end, the melodies did not reunite. They existed distinctly within the same final chord. When the audience stood, Evan wiped his eyes. Afterward, Lily embraced both of us separately. Photographs were taken with friends and professors, maycrudefiverly.com. Not with our old family arranged as though nothing had changed. Outside, Evan approached me while Lily spoke with classmates. The acquisition rejection was the right decision. He said, "Your letter helped identify the connection. I almost did not send it. I worried you would think I was trying to become useful enough to deserve access again." "Were you?" He considered the question. "Part of me probably was. I sent it anyway, because the information mattered even if you never answered. That was not redemption. It was a better choice. Thank you for sending it," I said. We shook hands and walked in different directions. The next morning, Daniel arrived at my office with the annual trust statement. He had more gray hair, too, though he insisted accounting caused none of it. "Do you remember the first statement I placed on the breakfast table?" he asked. Every line. Evan thought the balance was the surprise. So did everyone else? Daniel opened the current report. The balance had changed through investments, grants, licensing revenue, employee, ownership financing, and taxes. It was higher than on the morning of the divorce. But the number no longer carried the emotional force of a weapon drawn at the right moment. "What do you think the missed account actually gave you?" he asked. I looked at the first line. Beneficial owner Claire Rowan. Time. I said, "It gave me enough time not to sign while afraid." That was the real privilege of money in my story. It did not make me wiser, morally superior, or immune to grief. It allowed me to pay lawyers, protect housing, support Lily, and wait for evidence. It prevented Evan's manufactured emergency from becoming my only reality. The Clear Ledger Project began offering emergency stabilization grants alongside legal and financial assistance. The grants were modest compared with the trust, but they paid for hotel rooms, transportation, document retrieval, child care, and independent consultations. Sometimes a person did not need $28 million. She needed 72 hours in which fear could not force her signature. At Rowan Commons. We placed a sentence above the financial counseling room. A zero balance is information. It is not your value. People photographed the sign. Some shared it online without knowing where it came from. That was fine. Not every useful truth needed my name attached to it. My name remained where it mattered on my work, my agreements, my decisions, and the life I rebuilt. Years earlier, Evan looked at 4 empty accounts and believed he had written the ending. He believed that because the visible money was gone, I would accept the story he placed in front of me: abandoned wife, dependent housekeeper, silent partner, woman with no option except surrender. He missed one account. But more importantly, he missed the person who had created it, maintained it, and understood exactly why a boundary should exist before anyone needed it. He emptied our bank accounts before filing for divorce and told me I would leave with nothing. I did not argue. I did not beg. I waited for the second statement to reach the table. When he read the first line, his face lost all color because the name above the balance was the one thing he had spent 15 years trying to remove. Claire Rowan. The inventor. The owner. The woman who could survive his exit without disappearing inside it. My husband thought he had taken every dollar that made me secure. What he never understood was that the account he missed was built from the part of me he could never transfer the right to my own work, my own voice, and my own future. This story carries meaningful educational value about financial independence, intellectual ownership, and the importance of transparent systems. Through Claire's experience, viewers learn that access to a joint account does not automatically make every transfer honest or lawful. When property, business assets, or intellectual work are involved, clear contracts, independent records, and professional advice can protect people from manipulation and financial abuse. The story also demonstrates that success is rarely created by one celebrated individual. Atlas Route was built through Claire's original work and improved by engineers, drivers, analysts, and employees. Correcting the record does not mean erasing Evan's legitimate contributions. It means giving each person accurate recognition and refusing to let power determine who is allowed to exist in the story. Most importantly, Claire does not use her resources to destroy the company or leave her husband defenseless. She protects employees, continues essential operations, supports an independent investigation, and refuses to use their daughter as a weapon. Her actions show that justice is strongest when it is based on evidence. Due process, accountability, and repair, not humiliation or revenge. The story reminds us that truth should remain accurate even when the person who deserves credit has also caused harm. Scriptwriter Nguyen Van Chien.